I thought that there was widespread support for the Apollo mission in the 60s, but it turns out that's totally not true.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things.
It sounds so good, but I think it's because it's written in our subconscious that we chose to go to the moon, but most people didn't. Throughout the 60s, throughout the entire history of spaceflight, the support for it was never more than 50%. Take it from the horse's mouth himself and listen to Kennedy have to convince the NASA administrator to go to the moon.
I think this program is the top priority program of the agency. No, sir, I do not. I think it is one of the top priority programs. Otherwise, we shouldn't be spending this kind of money because I'm not that interested in space. I think it's good. I think we ought to know about it. We're ready to spend reasonable amounts of money, but we're talking about these fantastic expenditures which wreck our budget. And the only justification for it, in my opinion, to do it is because we hope to beat them and demonstrate that starting behind it we did by a couple of years. By God, we passed them.
The popular support for the Apollo program is a myth. It stands out in our memories not only because it was one of the greatest achievements of mankind, but because in our Mandela effect memory, it was the one time the general public were actually into space. But unfortunately, we're deluding ourselves. Over the past 6 months researching spaceflight history, I have been confronted with my delusions. Sometimes you read something which you thought only happened to you, and you find out that it happened 100 years ago to Dostoevsky. Sometimes you read something and you find out it was a delusion you shared with someone 100 years ago. And for some reason, it's always a Russian. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the godfather of spaceflight. He yearned to kill gravity and perfect mankind. Themes recurrent in the writings of spaceflight enthusiasts. Technological and psychological and social emancipation all rolled into one. But I didn't just suddenly accept this from reading a book, because the source of this delusion goes deep into my childhood.
You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me.
It took 38 years, but I think I'm able to be honest with myself now. And the story of how I got there it's a long story, but in a nutshell, they put me on a drug that didn't agree with me, and I attempted to commit suicide by traffic, and I got thrown into the loony bin for 72 hours. But inside that loony bin, something reset my brain. I've been going through a process over the past 2 years through a lot of stuff. And this was the culmination of that. And when they stripped me of my clothes and my dignity and my humanity and threw me in with the wolves, they weren't wolves. It ended up being really kind people. And having gone through what I went through the past few years, it's flipped a switch and I'm now able to connect with humanity and be honest with myself and see some of my delusions, I think. If you want to know what it's like to get 5150'd, I wrote it as a story on my Substack. As far as this video goes, let me share with you some of the myths of space exploration that I've uncovered that I have come to accept over the past 6 months, starting with the beginning. There were several factors that led to the origin of Sputnik, but one of the main political reasons was the desire of the United States to spy on the Soviets with impunity. Flying over another country was forbidden, obviously. But space was kind of a gray area. No one had ever done it, and the US was looking for a way to do it without pissing off the Soviets. So in 1955, Eisenhower declared that the United States would put a scientific satellite in orbit during the International Geophysical Year, normalizing it under the guise of scientific study. But in 1955, space exploration to the average person was still fantasy. The reason why the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is called the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and not the Rocket Propulsion Laboratory was because the word rocket lacked respectability because of the explosion of space-themed science fiction in the 1930s. So in order to convince the public that space exploration was even possible, NASA contracted with Walt Disney to create propaganda films.
Many of the things that seem impossible now will become realities tomorrow.
It turned out not to be necessary because the Soviet Union didn't need to convince their public. They didn't have that pesky democracy thing. They just had to convince one dude, Khrushchev. And their primary motivation wasn't necessarily spying on the United States. At that time, they were more interested in the prestige. Soviet Space Administrator Korolev was able to convince Khrushchev if they were to replace a warhead with a scientific satellite, it would peacefully demonstrate the superiority of Soviet rocket technology. And in sort of a dramatic scene, Khrushchev hesitated, maybe questioning his motives, but eventually said, "If the main task does not suffer, do it." When Sputnik eventually launched, the response from the world was surprising, especially to Khrushchev. And that's a key insight. The implications of Sputnik were felt most in the minds of the political leaders. The effect on the public has been exaggerated. Popular historians have used words like panic, hysteria, and fear to describe its effect. Recent studies do not bear this out. Many Americans were impressed by the achievement or were just indifferent. But America is, ostensibly, a democracy, and public support was necessary. So NASA was created to promote a positive image to America and the rest of the world, but it was also a distraction from the United States' military space program. The creation of NASA conveniently misled many to think that it ran the U.S. space program. In the first 4 years after Sputnik, the American government actually created 3 such programs. The first was the NASA-controlled civilian effort. The second was the U.S. Air Force-dominated military one. And the third you probably don't even know the name of because its name was classified until 1992. The NRO, or the National Reconnaissance Office, which was responsible for spy satellites and spying. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist. It's not all lies and deception. It is a little bit. But NASA's peaceful and scientific mission has inspired the general public throughout its entire existence. And one of the major sources of interest back then was the search for life. Back then, it was common thought that there was life all over the solar system. In those Disney films, they take advantage of that subconscious desire for life. There's this weird segment imagining ruins on the dark side of the moon.
A high Geiger count of 33 degrees.
My scintillation counter indicates a high degree of radioactivity on the same bearing.
Implying, I guess, that there may have been ancient aliens. On Mars, because of Schiaparelli and later Percival Lowell's observations of supposedly artificially carved channels, a significant portion of people thought that there was an intelligent civilization on Mars. The War of the Worlds was written as a direct result of that observation. H.G. Wells was writing on the fact that it was in the common consciousness that there was a civilization there. He also wrote this wild article in the 1908 issue of Cosmopolitan, imagining what they might really look like, based on nothing but speculation. Even though telescopes and science had debunked this in the early 20th century, the idea that we were not alone was embedded in the collective consciousness into the 50s.
Recently, an observer saw a bright flare of light suddenly appear and then slowly fade away. Was this an atomic explosion or a volcanic eruption? Or was it some sort of interplanetary signal? No one can say.
Intellectual pleas from scientists with such charisma as this,
whether or not there is life on Mars is pure speculation.
Were no match for our deep need to not be alone. But even scientists weren't immune to this. On Venus, which by then was known as a hellscape, dreams of life persisted. A then unknown scientist by the name of Carl Sagan tried to justify it.
Many theories of the Venus environment have been suggested. However, new information eliminates at least some of these theories. It is just possible that the hot region exists at a high altitude in the ionosphere of Venus. The surface temperature could then be almost Earth-like, and life as we know it could exist there.
It wouldn't be until we sent probes there that we would know for sure. And in 1962, when Mariner 2 was the first probe to fly by Venus, a New York Times article said it best. Venus says no. A few years later, in 1965, Mariner 4 would fly by Mars and send back the first digital images of the surface of another planet, dashing dreams of intelligent life and disproving the canal's theory for good, showing Mars as a dry and desolate wasteland unlikely to harbor any life at all. That is the climate that the Apollo program existed in, the beginning of the disillusion. In NASA historian Roger Lannis's own words for the public support, he writes, "These statistics do not demonstrate an unqualified support for NASA's effort to reach the moon in the 1960s. They suggest instead that the political crisis that brought public support to the initial lunar landing decision was fleeting, and within a short period the coalition that announced it had to reconsider their decision. It also suggests that the public was never enthusiastic about human lunar exploration, and especially about the costs associated with it. What enthusiasm it may have enjoyed waned over time, until by the end of the Apollo program in December 1972, one has the image of the program as something akin to a limping marathoner straining with every muscle to reach the finish line before collapsing. But the space race didn't collapse, it continued limping on. Both the United States and the Soviet Union still saw value in it as a corollary for prestige. They continued sending robotic probes into the solar system. And although the 70s were considered by some a golden age of planetary exploration, probes sending back images and data showing vantage points never seen by humans were not enough to rouse the general public. The 1970s proved indeed a time of disenchantment, disillusion, and disengagement. Not only in the United States, but also in Europe and the Soviet Union, outer space lost much of its capacity to arouse and engage divergent publics. Though in public discourse, Arthur C. Clarke called this period an interesting transition period that allows one to compare the realities of space with earlier imaginings of artists, in private correspondence, Clarke was far more blunt and less upbeat than this, and repeatedly lamented the present malaise when referring to the situation post-Apollo. "The human activity to which I have mainly devoted my life is in decline," he said in 1971. Although NASA has intentionally and unintentionally entrenched itself in the glacial bureaucracy of Congress to ensure its survival, it's been a war of attrition, and it's been losing ground ever since the 60s. I don't think this chart is hard to interpret. You might be tempted to blame the cultural changes in America, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, as reasons for space exploration's continuing downfall. But I would argue that public support is less important than many people think it is. Studies suggest that NASA's public support was less important than most people have previously asserted, and that the overall activities of NASA have been advanced by a small base of supporters, challenged by a small group of opponents, and sustained by a larger number of people who accept a status quo in space exploration. Historically, the most important factor to NASA's existence has been national prestige, not a dedication to curiosity or science or spacefaring future. And that fact is painfully apparent with the Trump administration's proposed cuts to the science funding of NASA. And while I am in no way defending the Trump administration, that value is not unique to this administration. It's been there since the start of the space race. In the formative years of the early space age, the euphoria faded, the fear remained. There was no transformation of the international system, no revision of priorities towards global welfare and cooperation, no metamorphosis in human philosophy and values. Instead, there was only the maturation of the military-industrial complex. Is that ever going to happen? I don't know. I can only focus on what I can control, and right now, I just don't want to be one of those naive, solipsistic few who preach the gospel of the promised land in space. They want to mine the moon for minerals, capture asteroids and nudge them towards the Earth with mass drivers, build colonies at the gravitational libration points of the Earth-Moon system, plant crops for a hungry Earth in a gigantic hydroponic farms in orbit where the sun always shines, build square miles of solar arrays in orbit to beam down in microwaves the energy demanded by 21st century civilization. It is the technocratic vision in CinemaScope, the dream of voyages to that utopian realm we might call Tsiolkovskia, where Earth, then the solar system, then the universe are given over to the pious purveyors of power, where mankind's social imperfections are to be attacked and vanquished one by one until none remain. It's a nice vision, but I think we need to vanquish our delusions first. And delusions aren't exclusive to spaceflight enthusiasts. I think you probably heard the same phrase that I've heard where people say, we need to fix things here on Earth first, which is just as delusional. It's exactly the same type of delusion. It's saying that we need to perfect humanity here on first before we go into space, which doesn't make any sense. I just want to live in a culture where we are a little less, where we're not encouraged to be delusional. This video has already been quote heavy, but I want to end with another quote from David Foster Wallace. And the world will not discourage you from operating on your default settings, because the world of men and money and power hums merrily along quite nicely on the fuel of fear and contempt and frustration and craving and the worship of self. Our own present culture has harnessed these forces in ways that have yielded extraordinary wealth and comfort and personal freedom. The freedom all to be lords of our own tiny, skull-sized kingdoms, alone at the center of all creation. I don't know how to fix things. For me, I had to take extreme measures. I took mushrooms. I left everyone and everything I knew and lived alone in the desert for 2 years. And I think some of you are going to say the answer is socialism. which I don't think it is. Your heart's in the right place. And I think some of you are going to say that I'm a commie for having feelings. All I know right now is that I don't want to be alone in my skull-sized kingdom. That's why I'm putting my stupid face on this thing. I do think we have a lot of problems with our culture. The one I can think about right now is why, after a drug that they put me on, did I involuntarily spend 72 hours in a mental hospital, and now I have a bill for $10,000. So if you'd like to support this channel, check out the sponsor of this video, Brilliant, which I actually do use. I was never good at math in school. I barely made it through Algebra 2, and the way it was taught was just, it didn't click for me. But when I started experimenting with Blender's geometry nodes, I realized that I was actually learning concepts from vector math and trigonometry because I could see them in action. And that's exactly what Brilliant does. They have this awesome section on visual algebra, which makes learning it actually intuitive and ties it to real visual ideas that make sense, showing you a different way to think, taking you step by step through a thought process that you might not have thought of. It's more than math with fields like programming and data analysis and AI. To learn for free on Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/theovervieweffect. Scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description. Brilliant also gives my viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant. Big thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video.